From Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
Congress prepares probes into the drug boats. Welcome to the Monday edition as Republican-led committees in both the House and Senate investigate a report that the Secretary of Defense issued a kill everybody order on alleged drug smugglers coming out of Venezuela. We're going to have a lot more on this when we sit down with Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson here in Washington with insights today from retired four-star General Wesley Clark, who was commander of U.S. Southern Command. We'll have analysis from our political panel. Back together off the holiday with Congress back in town and no plan yet to tackle health care costs. We'll have Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino weigh in, all after a look at Wall Street. Charlie Pellet has that for us from World Headquarters in New York. Charlie, Monday trade getting better.
Indeed. We're off session lows, Joe Mathieu, but still looking at losses for the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, kicking off the first trading day of the new month with declines. S&P right now down 14, drop there of 0.2% as traders shun riskier corners of the market amid a sell-off in crypto. Right now, the Dow is down 209, down 0.4. The S&P, keeping it all in context, down 0.2. NASDAQ also down by 0.2%. 10-year at 4.09% with a 2-year that's currently yielding 3.53%. Gold is down $6 the ounce, 42.33, down 0.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude advancing now by 1.2%. 59.24 a barrel. Cannot ignore silver, by the way, 58.42 the ounce. Silver up 3.4%. Bitcoin, though, the big story, it is plunging 6.7%, just above $85,000. $85,025 right now on Bitcoin. Moderna shares down 5.7% after the FDA said in a memo late last week it will place new restrictions on which vaccines hit the market. Other vaccine makers lower as well. Novavax down 3.5%. BioNTech down by 4.6%. Recapping, stocks lower. S&P right now down 0.2%. The S&P at 68.37. Bitcoin down now by 6.7%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. And back we go to Washington once again. Your host, Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie. Great to see Charlie Pellet back in the chair today. He'll have more on Wall Street coming up in just about 20 minutes' time here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Welcome to the Monday edition. We've got a lot to talk about, and I hope you had a great Thanksgiving and a very long weekend. It was actually a very busy weekend on the news front, and we're just now able to pick up the pieces, try to start figuring out where we're going. And we're going to be talking in just a moment about that with retired four-star General Wesley Clark, with a very busy weekend involving Venezuela, not to mention Russia and Ukraine. We do want to start, though, with the prospect of two investigations on Capitol Hill, one in the House, one in the Senate, to find out exactly what was behind this order, if in fact there was a second order to fire a second missile at one of the alleged drug smuggling boats coming out of Venezuela. In a story that emerged over the weekend in the Washington Post, a kill everybody order to U.S. commanders came from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, which was very bad news for two alleged smugglers who did not die in the initial strike and were clinging to wreckage as Americans looked at them on live satellite imagery. The secretary either making the order in that period of time or someone responding to it from earlier, striking that boat once again and killing those two people. Many Republicans have been outraged by this. As I mentioned, the Senate Armed Services Committee announcing it will conduct vigorous oversight to determine the facts. The House Armed Services Committee doing the same. We saw on Sunday morning television Republicans like Representative Mike Turner, Representative Don Bacon suggesting this would be illegal if true. Tim Kaine, the Democrat from Virginia, the senator, using the phrase war crime on Sunday morning television. Not so much when President Trump was asked on Air Force One, standing by his defense secretary, to suggest this order was never made. Listen.
We'll look into it. But no, I wouldn't have wanted that, not a second strike. The first strike was very lethal. It was fine. And if there were two people around, but Pete said that didn't happen.
Pete said that didn't happen, says the president, but also adding he wouldn't have wanted that second strike. And around 5 o'clock today, a few hours from now, the president will be sitting down with his war commanders in the White House to reportedly get to the bottom of this. Pete Hegseth, not terribly worried The man who refers to himself, and President Trump refers to him as the Secretary of War, on social media with a fake children's book cover starring Franklin the Turtle. The title, Franklin Targets Narco-Terrorists. And there we see the little turtle wearing a helmet and firing a shoulder-launched missile at those so-called narco-terrorists in the water below. Hegseth writing on the X post for your Christmas wish list. Somebody's going to be wrong here, and this will be a big story when it happens. With us in Washington, before we talk to the general, is Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, who spent the weekend watching these stories unfold, our senior editor with us here in the nation's capital. Wendy, it's great to see you. Welcome back. I don't know if we expect news out of this Oval Office event today, or the Pentagon is apparently for the first time going to be briefing a new cadre of reporters, having shown the door to a number of them, including our own.
Absolutely. Well, if that briefing, we will only hear afterwards probably the party line, the MAGA line on this, because, as you said, the Pentagon had put up new rules for reporting at the Pentagon that basically is saying that if Pete Hegseth doesn't like what you're going to write, you can't work in the building. Yeah. So what you have now is a bunch of right-wing, MAGA-friendly reporters who will get this briefing and then dutifully report what the defense secretary said without question. But kudos to the Washington Post for breaking the story that Hegseth, apparently did order the second strike that would kill the two people clinging to boats who we don't even know were narco-terrorists. And they might have just been low-level guys who were asked to take a package and don't even know what's in it. That's what has upset these Republican senators so much. Sure. And this is really the latest and most stunning so far break that we're seeing with Republicans against the president and the president's policies. I mean, to have the chairman of Senate Armed Services and House Armed Services using the kind of language they did and vowing an investigation, and probably will want Hegseth, and saying that, by the way, that Hegseth, they had asked for information from Hegseth, and he hasn't provided it in a timely fashion, which that's the one thing that really ticks off Congress. When they ask for stuff, you got to get it to them by the deadline. And so now they're launching a full investigation. So I think we will get to the bottom of whether this happened or not. But and that line from Trump that if that's what happened, I wouldn't like it. Yes. That actually could cost Hegseth his job.
That's what I want to ask you about. We've tried to parse the president's words before. It's usually not a very successful endeavor. But if you listen to what he said, I'll just read the words. We'll look into it. That in itself is important. He could have said, there's nothing to see here. It's fake news. We'll look into it.
Right.
But no, I would not have wanted that. Not a second strike. The first strike was very little. It was fine, he said. Almost as if the world is second-guessing what they were doing there to begin with. Does he allow enough room for himself to separate himself? Is there sunlight here between the president and the defense secretary?
Yeah, I think it does, Joe, because his pattern has been to say, first, that's fake news, it didn't happen. Yeah. That's a Democrat hoax, it didn't happen. I love Pete Hegseth, he's doing a great job.
Yes.
You didn't read any of those words. The words that he was saying were, we'll look into it. And if the president really didn't know about a lethal order like that, I might be surprised. That seems in a top-down management structure that Trump has instilled on the White House, one would think he would know whether those orders had been given. If it were a surprise to him, I think that would irritate him tremendously to be caught like that, not knowing. And then, he does like Hegseth, but I don't know really how much he likes Hegseth, enough to keep him on in the face of a revolt from Congress.
Well, this is pretty remarkable, Wendy. We thank you for helping us walk through it here. Bloomberg senior editor Wendy Benjaminson with us live in Washington as we add the voice of the general, and deeply curious to hear what Wesley Clark thinks at this moment, because he was actually the boss in Southcom, commander of U.S. Southern Command, retired four-star general in the U.S. Army, now, of course, at Wesley Clark and Associates. General, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I don't know if we're even asking the right questions here, which is why I'm very glad to have you with us as part of our conversation. So I'll start with the investigations. These two committees in the House and the Senate, how important are these investigations going to be, and will that be the official word on what happened?
They are important. Thanks for having me on. They are important, and they will get to the bottom of it. I'm confident. And that will be the official word unless, the Secretary of Defense suddenly comes out and throws everything out into the public.
Mm-hmm. Does this conversation worry you when you hear senators using the term war crimes?
I think it's the tip of the iceberg, really, because there's been concern about the Venezuela operation from the beginning. First of all, it represents at this time a distraction from what's going on with Ukraine, where Ukraine is fighting for what Americans believe we have. The majority of the American people want to support Ukraine, and this seems to be a distraction to enable the rug to be pulled out from under Ukraine in what was a 28-point peace plan. Now, that may not be going forward, but that's the first thing. Then the second thing is, what's the objective in Venezuela? Why are we going against Maduro? Sure, maybe we don't like him, but are you going to put 25% of the U.S. Navy down there indefinitely? What's the point? What's the objective? What's the strategy? And what about the rest of our global responsibilities? That's the second thing. And then there's the business of striking these boats. And then there's, and this is like the cherry on top, that's the allegation that maybe there was a war crime committed here on the order of the Secretary of Defense. So there's a lot to unpack here at this time, to be honest with you.
Wow. Well, that's why we're glad to have you with us. If this, in fact, turned out to be true, as was described by the report, the first strike, 2 men survive. We went back and hit them again without taking them captive, without boarding the vessel, without trying to investigate where they were from. And maybe they had imagery of these men getting on that boat. Even with that said, would that equal a war crime?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so these things are always under law. But all of us in the armed forces were told there are obvious crimes that you don't do. No matter who says to do it, you don't shoot a prisoner. You don't kill unarmed civilians. And so these people were basically no threat to the United States. Their mission was finished with the destruction of the boat. So they sort of fall in the category of people who were no threat, and they shouldn't have been killed. Yeah, it looks like a war crime, prima facie.
Wow. General Alvin Halsey, the admiral, who is retiring as the head of U.S. Southern Command, may well be called to testify before these committees. How important would that be, knowing that he can't play with the truth on this? And he was, of course, at odds with Hegseth over the operation. That's why he's stepping down. Will Admiral Halsey be the key to this case?
Not necessarily. We don't know where the reports came from. And looks like it was under the SOCOM rather than Southcom. So it might be the Special Operations Command commander who has to testify. Now, what we don't know is why Admiral Halsey was unhappy and why he's stepping down early. So maybe he'll be a peripheral witness in this. But it doesn't sound like he was under the chain of command. Maybe he was uncomfortable with the whole operation, or maybe they just had it out for him for some reason. There have been over 20 general and flag officers fired by this or forced to resign by this administration. And there's never really been an explanation for most of it. It is unusual. Normally it's not done. And it does worry people in Congress that the military is being politicized. The whole idea of the United States Armed Forces, like the civil service, is you work for whoever the people elect. You're not partisan. And that's been a really important principle in the U.S. Armed Forces.
What did you make of President Trump's post over the weekend addressed to airlines, pilots, drug dealers, and human traffickers? He said, please consider the airspace above and surrounding Venezuela to be closed in its entirety. Does the United States have the right to close Venezuelan airspace, General? How would that work?
I don't know, but if I were a pilot, I would stay out of Venezuelan airspace. And I would imagine the international civil aviation authorities are coming back to the United States, and there's discussion about this right now.
Boy. Well, we know that we've got quite the armada set up in that area, General. We've talked about that. It remains, including the Jerry Ford Carrier Strike Group. President Trump said on Air Force One last evening that he had a phone call with Nicolas Maduro, the very leader here we're considering replacing in a regime change operation. If you put your diplomat hat on, what do you make of these dual tracks that the administration is taking?
Well, I think it should be dual tracked. You know, before the invasion of Iraq in 2003, we were trying to persuade Saddam Hussein to leave. Apparently, we had offered him $2 billion if he'd just get out of town. And we were told, basically, he was afraid that even if he took the money, he'd never live to use it because someone would knock him off. So he elected to stay and tough it out. I don't know whether President Trump offered Maduro any money or not. But the desirable way to settle this at this point is for Maduro to leave. And that's the signal that he's been given. Now, is it wise U.S. policy? Is it the right strategy? Is this where our national priorities are? Those are different matters. But just in terms of the operation, the easiest resolution, the cleanest resolution, is for President Trump to say, look, I got a bunch of stuff out here. A lot of bad things could happen. You don't want that to happen, especially to you personally. Here's a little bit of money. Go somewhere else. But apparently funds weren't offered. And Maduro has said, no, maybe there's going to be a second phone call at some point.
Boy, this is day to day, hour to hour. General, we know that the president will be meeting around 5 p.m., according to reports, with his war commanders to talk about next steps and what happened with regard to these drug boats, alleged drug boats. And of course, we'll let everyone know as soon as we learn more on this. But I have to ask you about what's taking place in Ukraine now that we see Steve Witkoff pack his bags for another visit to Moscow. There was quite a read in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, General. Make money, not war, was the headline, to suggest that Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and others are motivated by resuming economic ties and investment opportunities in Russia when it comes to the idea of ending the war in Ukraine. Is that a dangerous approach or one that will actually bring peace?
I think it's unlikely to bring peace in these circumstances. Because Russia is a very difficult country to deal with. It's not a normal country. And, Putin is prepared to say and do whatever's necessary to get what he wants. He wants Ukraine. He wants all of Ukraine. He wants the Baltic states back under Russian control. And he wants NATO basically to be disassembled, at least as far as it is in Eastern Europe. And, of course, he'd like the United States to get out of Europe. So there's a lot more riding on this than financial transactions. On the other hand, if the world runs on finance, there's no doubt about it. And Russia does have certain commodities that could be put on the market if sanctions were lifted. So, but these men should be negotiating on what's in U.S. national interest overall, not in narrow financial terms that could be, swayed
Steve
just to their
Witkoff
friends
heads from Moscow today. General Wesley Clark, thank you as always, General. Thank you for being with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio with only 12 days to go, at least in the Senate, 13 days in the House. If that makes you feel any comfortable, these are working days before everybody heads home once again for the holiday season. Remembering that we've got some pretty major deadlines looming here. December 31st is when Obamacare subsidies expire, the same subsidies they shut the government down over and have still not managed to deal with after reopening. Then, of course, January 30 is when the government runs out of money. And if they don't figure out the health care part, we could be talking about another shutdown. With all the time that has passed, though, there are no new plans to talk about, save Bill Cassidy's plan. And leadership has not coalesced around it. Everyone's waiting for a cue from the White House. Will we give money directly to people? Will we simply extend the Obamacare subsidies? Because premiums are going up anywhere from 150 to 400% and in many cases, in red states. Bill Cassidy, who I mentioned, the Republican from Louisiana, a physician, is out with his own plan for a replacement of Obamacare. He joined us earlier today on Bloomberg. He was on Bloomberg's surveillance. Listen to how he described.
If you got this amount of money, and currently under the current plan, you give 100% to insurance companies and they take 20% for overhead and profit. Instead, you give 100% to patients in terms of deposits within a health savings account. First, you're lowering their deductible, and because you have lowered their deductible, they can take a cheaper bronze plan. Now, normally you don't because your deductible is higher. We just lowered their deductible. They're getting a cheaper bronze plan. By the way, when you give power to the patient, she gets the health care she chooses to have that she knows she needs, as opposed to the health care the insurance company permits her to have. A lot of wins in here for the patient, who would not be for that, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat.
Let me throw another date on there. It's the 10th of December, 10 days from now, next Wednesday, Fed Day. That's the day John Thune promised Democrats a vote on a health care plan. The one that they said might never happen in the House. There's no promise there. So will there be an actual piece of legislation to vote on? Is the first question we're asking today as we assemble our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne Zaino and Rick Davis are with us. Jeanne is Democracy Visiting Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick is our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. What do you think, Jeanne? Will there be anything to vote on next Wednesday?
Yeah, hard to believe it's Fed Day and the big expected vote. I'm not sure because we haven't really seen anything on paper yet. And kudos to Senator Cassidy for having more than just a theory or a concept of a plan. That has been few and far between on the Republican side. So kudos for him. The problem is what you said at the top, Joe, which is, 12 to 13 legislative days left. I don't think we could see anything beyond some kind of kicking the can, whether it is an extension for a year or some kind of extension. Something like Cassidy is talking about is an important idea. It's good to consider, but it's going to take a lot more time, not just in the Senate, but when we look at the House where the real challenge is. So I think the best we can see this month is going to be something of a kicking the can.
Kick the can, Rick. What if we don't have anything to vote on next week? What happens then?
Well, if we don't have anything to vote on, it probably means that the Democrats are having trouble finding their own plan to put forward. Remember, the onus is really on them to present a plan to be voted on. And I would be shocked if they don't show up with a 2-year extension to the Obamacare subsidies for insurance, 1-year plan with some tweaks on eligibility. I mean, it's really not hard. This thing has been really, really extensively debated and discussed, and including finding some support amongst Republicans for, sort of extending the plan for a year and not letting these subsidies drop off and the insurance prices go up so high. So I really honestly can't see why it's such a big deal in the Senate to have a vote on a plan that we know the Democrats are all uniformly in support of, and find, 5 or 6 or 7 Republicans to go along with that. That's kind of how we got to where we are. But I agree with Jeanne. I mean, like, how that plan gets through the House of Representatives, good luck. I would say the one thing that's building is there's a lot of fear amongst the Republicans around the fact that we don't have a plan in healthcare. We've just gone through the government shutdown related to this. We had nothing really to say about it. Cassidy does have a partial plan that a lot of Republicans may be willing to walk the plank on, but it doesn't really solve the major problem, and that is, does the voters who go to the ballot box in November for the midterm elections look at their House member who's a Republican and say, yeah, you helped me reduce the price of my groceries. You helped me reduce the price of my health care. And you did it all without increasing government spending. Boy, I think 3 strikes and you're out. I mean, so we'll see. But I do think that there's a lot of concern.
Wow. Well, Jeanne, there was a plan. I think there have been a couple of them here on the Democratic side, as Rick alludes. Chuck Schumer, toward the tail end of the shutdown, showed up, remember, with a one-year extension. That was going to buy enough time to negotiate something larger. There are also proposals for permanent extensions. Why not just send that over to John Thune's office?
I think that's what Democrats will try to do. I don't know if it will get through. I doubt a permanent extension at this point would have any chance, maybe a 1 year. I think of that as a real lifeline from the Democrats to the Republicans who are getting killed in the polling on this. But does it get through? Based on the reaction to Donald Trump's floating an idea of a plan for a 2-year extension, I think it was before Thanksgiving, the visceral negative reaction from Republicans in the House, particularly on that. Very, very tough to see that happening. And I think this all speaks to the fact that the president is finding himself on the wrong side of an issue that is quickly becoming paramount in the minds of most Americans, whether 60, 70, 80% in some polls of Americans saying we cannot afford to live. Healthcare is a part of that. And the president is doing everything else from designing ballrooms to planning attacks on Venezuela for unknown reasons. What he's not doing is getting out with the American public and saying, I've got a plan to address this, maybe because he knows his own Republicans in Congress are not willing to pass it. So he's really going to have to use his capital in the House if he has any hopes of pushing something through. But it is going to be an uphill battle for the president and the GOP at this point.
Well, that is for sure. So if we have a vote next week, we'll see, Rick. How concerned are you about that other deadline at the end of January when it comes to government funding? Because it does seem that we could actually see a real budget with some minibuses come together here with maybe a little bit of time, maybe not required. Could we actually have an old-fashioned budget passed, or am I starting to lose my mind here?
I think within what you just described, Joe, there are some appropriations bills that are ready to go. Maybe you combine them, as you said, into a minibus like they did at the end of the last spending bill, and do get some of that funding through. So some of the funding is permanent now for the fiscal year 25, and so I think there'll be probably enough momentum, especially before the holidays before the Christmas holiday to get something done. And has always been remarked on this show, of course, there's never a deal until your back is up against the wall in Congress on timing, and you can smell those jet fumes and getting ready to go home. So my guess is that's going to happen. There is an interesting battle going on in the House right now, where a lot of the more right-wing anti-debt anti-deficit Republicans are saying, let's just pass this bill. Let's just pass a permanent CR. It's not going to raise spending. It's, who cares at this stage? We've only got, 8 months to go before the fiscal year is over. And we can at least go home and say we held the line on new spending, which is going to be one of the three stools of the leg, I think, that are going to, sort of force these guys to make some decisions when it comes to what's in it for the taxpayer. So I think there are a lot of hard decisions to make, but it's set up pretty well for getting a deal done before the end of the year.
Jeanne, we've got our eyes on Tennessee's 7th congressional district, where there's going to be a special election tomorrow. And I wonder if you think all of this plays into the outcome. This is a Trump plus 22 district. But Donald Trump is actually going to hold a tele-rally this evening. The Speaker of the House is going to be on the line to support Republican Matt Van Epps. President was also on Truth Social over the weekend talking about Van Epps' Democratic challenger, Democratic State Rep Afton Ben. I'm asking you to get out and vote for Matt Van Epps. He says he will be a great congressman. Unlike his opponent, he cherishes Christianity and country music. She hates them both. I don't know if that's true, Jeanne, but in our remaining moment, can you win Nashville if you hate country music?
Apparently, she's a state senator there. She was, I believe it was CNN, maybe one of the other stations on Sunday. They asked her about this clip. She did say it, but she said it was before, Joe, she was an elected official. And when people are interrupting her, getting in and out of her house with weddings and all these things, she gets annoyed. I do think the Republican will pull it through. The fact that we're even talking about it is enormously telling. It's a 22 district for Trump, as you mentioned.
Yep. Yeah, get ready to hear a lot about moral victories tomorrow, maybe on both sides. Great conversation. Great to see you both together again. That's Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors, the best in the business. We just confirmed we've got another show tomorrow. Caroline Leavitt says the president will be holding a cabinet meeting. We'll bring it to you here on Bloomberg. Great to have you as well on Bloomberg TV and radio. The Monday edition underway with some big questions that we're asking about the congressional agenda, as we just explored with our political panel. But also, when it comes to war and peace, Steve Witkoff is getting on an airplane today, probably packing his bags right now. The man who has not been to Ukraine yet this year is making his 6th trip to Moscow, where he will be sitting down with Vladimir Putin. And he's not the only one talking about this. President Zelensky in France today to speak with Emmanuel Macron, who we understand just as well spoke with President Trump about Ukraine. That headline just crossed the terminal a short time ago, with hopes that we're on the precipice of some sort of breakthrough here, knowing that Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, have helped to hammer out something in the area of what is now, we understand, a 19-point peace plan, having had a 5-hour meeting over the weekend here outside of Miami, focused on exactly where the border will be drawn in Ukraine, according to the latest from Axios. Witkoff hosting the company at his Shell Bay Golf Club near Miami before he heads to Moscow in hopes of presenting something to Vladimir Putin when he gets there this week. This could be a pivotal week in the future trajectory of this war. The president was asked about motivations when it comes to seeking peace on the flight home last evening. Here he is talking with reporters on Air Force One. Listen.
I think Russia would like to see it end, and I think I know Ukraine would like to see it end.
You just said that Ukraine has a little bit of problems.
Well, we have a corruption situation going on, which is not helpful.
And is that impeding the peace talks?
Well, I said it was going on for 3 years, right? Didn't I say it? For 3 years I said it, so I was way ahead of schedule. But I think that there's a good chance we can make a deal.
Indeed, 3 years. The president who said he would have this war ended on day one. We are now rounding out year one, and joined in studio, I'm glad to say, by Ben Jensen, who comes to us from CSIS, director of the Futures Lab, senior fellow for the Defense and Security Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ben, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio, as always. We can talk to you about military strategy and about diplomacy, and I'd like to get to both here. Why don't we start with the obvious, and that's the diplomatic track that Steve Witkoff and others are on. The president seems to be dispatching different voices here. Kushner and Witkoff, you go to one. Secretary of State Rubio, you go to the other. At some point, we need everybody at the same table, don't we?
We do, but also this is how modern peace negotiations work. So despite some of the strangeness that surrounds this, despite that it's a very tight personalistic network that the president is using to negotiate, which is different than standard diplomatic practice, at least in the United States, everything you're seeing playing out is actually not that uncommon in some senses. So if you look at the actual statistics of how peace negotiations and wars end, sadly, in the modern world, wars either peter out or you come to an uneasy ceasefire that fails. So only 31% of conflicts end in some type of negotiated settlement. And even of those, 40%, even during negotiations, relapse into conflict within 5 years. So I think that's why you've accurately seen Secretary Rubio characterize this phase as the start of a negotiation. He called it, I think, a living document. That's right. And so that's why you have everyone going out, trusted person-to-person conversations. And we're trying to work out, we've gone from 28, the U.S. initial kind of Witkoff deal, I guess we can call it, down to 24, the European. Now we're down to a 19-point proposal. And so what you're seeing is each side engage in a bargaining activity that allows them to look at where the most intractable issues are, what's mutually acceptable, although painful to both sides. So I'm still mildly optimistic, but I think the best case is that this all results in a ceasefire, and I'd rate that as less than even chances.
Fascinating. I've never heard those stats before. That's fascinating for the backdrop to these talks. There's a lot that Ukraine has to potentially lose here. What would Russia be giving up in the plans that you've heard about?
Well, I'm curious about that too, and apparently only Special Envoy Witkoff knows that, and it doesn't look like a lot. So we've actually been studying this pretty in depth at the Futures Lab for a year. So about a year ago, I traveled to Ukraine about every 6 months to try to do my best to help out with that side of the conflict, not the Russian side. And what I noticed in that process is I had a sense the war is coming to a critical point, and you're going to have to end at some point. No war can last forever. This has been brutal for Ukrainian society. These are people fighting for their freedom against all odds. And so we started to write over the last year of what would the negotiations look like. In fact, we actually surveyed experts. We scraped prominent news sources. And then we actually trained using an API into ChatGPT 4.0. We actually ran 1,000 different simulations of different peace negotiations to use kind of modern technology to analyze the distribution. And so your viewers can check that out at Strategic Headwinds, but that's a lot of our research on this is shown.
All public.
That's all public.
That's
we built this because we want Ukrainian negotiators, European negotiators, American negotiators first and foremost to have access to objective, nonpartisan data they can use to help find a negotiation. What do you find in that? Number one, good news about the Macron meeting, because whenever we look at human experts or the AI model replicating them, security guarantees are the most important thing. So the 28-point plan was dead on arrival because it didn't really have anything for credible security guarantees. It kind of threatened diplomatic démarches and some economic punishment. So security guarantees are by far the most important thing. Where we saw humans and AI diverge is what comes next. And so humans seem to think there's really a room for freeing up these Russian frozen assets, giving it back to Moscow, reducing sanctions, so kind of using economics to induce Moscow in. When we ran the AI simulations, and that included loading over 300 past peace agreements in, they were less optimistic about the economic component. Now, I still personally think economic statecraft is the fulcrum here. That's the only way you can get Russia to agree. And I think the good news, if there is any out of the Witkoff trips, is that he seems to have the right people in Russia talking about some type of investment scheme. The bad news is that doesn't seem to direct the money to rebuild Ukraine that Russia has spent years now destroying.
I'm blown away by this. Did you know, James, we were going to get into this? So AI is the platform, though. Economic diplomacy might be the fulcrum, but AI is the platform that you're talking about to find peace. Is this the future of war and peace?
Well, we think so. I mean, in my lab, we believe that AI agents can help humans digest larger volumes of information. So you still need expert human users. And I'm sure your audience in Bloomberg has been using technology like this for a long time, right? It's still a trader's intuition, but the more data they can analyze, the more they can apply statistical reasoning to it, the more they can find past patterns, look for those strange signals, the more likely they are to seize an opportunity. So what we've done is use that initial analytics to then look at where we needed to go deep. And that's why most of the pieces your viewers will find on there deal with the details of security guarantees and then some of the economic aspects. Now, one of the most important things to highlight in that all parties agree is that even if it seems like this deal comes to an end, it doesn't. That 40% relapsing in 5 years is really important. And one of the major things to really watch for is usually the reason it relapses is because each political party has a backlash, a spoiler domestically. So Zelensky, if that line is drawn wrong, and in the middle of a corruption scandal, Zelensky's all of a sudden voted or chased out of office, and you have hardline factions come up in Ukraine. I'd love to see Putin replaced, but we ought to really think what comes after Putin, and if even Russia would stay a actual sovereign state or dissolve into a series of regions. So one of the things you have to watch for carefully as you spread this out, and this is why it's important to build that RAG model with AI to analyze historic peace agreements, is that domestic political spoiler, how domestic politics matter when you're ending an international war.
This has been a real eye-opener for me. Before you leave us, with all of that said, do you expect this week to bring a breakthrough, or are we way over our skis on this?
hope and pray are different than reasoned estimates.
Okay,
and so
fine.
I would say I think Secretary Rubio is right. This is a living document.
Yeah.
I think Putin is going to prolong this as much as possible, and he's still going to try to bomb Ukraine into submission.
Wow.
Our firepower strike data showed that the month of October saw a threefold increase over 1 year. Well, so October 2024 versus 2025, 3 times as many Shaheeds, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles were used to target Ukrainian cities with a special focus on power infrastructure. He wants the Ukrainian people to freeze while he protracts negotiations so that he can get more territory and get more of that oligarch loot back in his pocket and not investing in a dynamic Ukrainian free economy.
Cold as a weapon. I learn something every time I talk to you. Ben Jensen, CSIS, thank you so much. We all learn from Ben when he's here. Back it up on YouTube or on TV or subscribe to the podcast, because I haven't heard that anywhere. Center for Strategic and International Studies, Ben Jensen. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington as we round out Balance of Power here for this Monday, the early edition. We want to just keep tabs on what's happening on Wall Street because we saw a real run at a recovery a short time ago. We're back in the red here, but well off our lows of the session. And Norah, Mulinda, Bloomberg markets correspondent, is with us now from world headquarters in New York. We just can't help ourselves from buying the dip here, Norah.
We clearly cannot. But I mean, we are seeing a lot of dip buyers out in the market, as you mentioned here. This is really encouraging to a lot of the sources that I've been speaking with, especially as we think about the momentum headed into year end. I mean, if you think about the fact that we've been seeing a rally, the longest streak of monthly gains since 2021. But as we sit here today, of course, we are seeing a bit of a breather from that rally as we are seeing stocks here falling into the red. And it's a little bit of risk off sentiment that we're seeing percolating right now, especially as we see a lot of traders looking ahead to the Fed meeting. There's still a lot of unrest right now, a lot of questions right now about the strength of the consumer. But I mean, of course, we did get that retail picture here from Black Friday here that really did show us that we are seeing strength in the consumer, despite the fact that there were a lot of concerns about resiliency there.
Bitcoin remains a problem here. I guess crypto across the board. We're back below 85,000, Norah. A lot of the narrative last week and the week earlier when things started to fall out of bed was that crypto was the culprit here in leading stocks lower, that it was forcing people to raise money in stocks like NVIDIA and the Mag 7, and it's still going down, Norah. How should we be reading into this market-wide?
Well, analysts are really looking at 80,000 as the new key support level here. And this is really a big difference from what we saw when we saw a rally of Bitcoin above 100,000. So we really are seeing some pressure here on this asset class. And it's no surprise when you did see a lot of people pulling out of Bitcoin when there is some sort of risk off sentiment in the market. But we did get that news from Strategy, of course, also seeing a sell off after they said that they had were creating a $1.4 billion reserve to pay for future dividend and interest payments. But a lot of investors are really saying that this isn't really quelling concerns more broadly, that a lot of these companies like Bitcoin treasury firms are actually going to be able to be forced to sell their Bitcoin holdings here, especially if we continue to see a downward trend.
Yeah, well, we'll keep tabs on the rest of the session with your help, Norah. Thank you so much. Norah, Mulinda, back with us on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington, where we now have breaking news coming from the White House. In our remaining moment, I do want to let you know, and Caroline Levitt is talking about this with reporters in the briefing room. We have a document here about President Trump's MRI. He was asked about this on the plane last evening and could not detail what body part was being looked at. Apparently, according to Caroline Levitt, again, the White House press secretary, this was preventative. The MRI, preventative imaging, cardiovascular imaging, the president's cardiovascular system showing excellent health, abdominal imaging, perfectly normal. As I read from the letter, President Trump's cardiovascular imaging, perfectly normal. There is no evidence of arterial narrowing, impairing blood flow, or abnormalities in the heart or major vessels. The heart chambers are normal in size, it reads. The vessel walls appear smooth and healthy, and there are no signs of inflammation or clotting. Overall, cardiovascular system showing excellent health. The president made clear it was not likely his brain they were looking at. Now we know it was his heart, and we will have more on this on the late edition of Balance of Power. I hope you'll join me starting at 5 p.m. Eastern Time as we get back to reality in Washington. Lawmakers back on the Hill, and the president in the White House. We'll see you back here at 5 p.m. on the fastest show in politics on Bloomberg.